hypothetically were watching TV or you were scrolling on social media and you found a funny clip. I mean, it was funny. Like President Trump is standing there taking some questions, and all of a sudden he gets hit in the face with a boom mic. You know, he looks at it. Now, of course, we all laugh. But, Cindy, given the fact that there have been multiple assassination attempts, is this a laughing matter?
Well, exactly. I don't think that this story was given the weight that it should have been given, considering what kind of breach that could have been. Let's actually watch the clip. You described it, but let's watch it in case anyone missed it. And pay attention to President Trump's reaction. Let's roll.
President, Mr. President, obviously you're concerned.
She just became a big story tonight. Right? Yes, sir. Did you see that?
It's the eyebrows.
Well, his reaction is pretty funny.
His reaction, so I'm thinking two things as I'm watching that reaction. One is like, that was a serious security breach. Do you realize what you just did? And then try to make light of it. But the other part in my mind was, I think most people know, I don't know, but Trump is a serious germaphobe. So you can, you know what
Is he really?
Oh yeah. That's why.
What is the source of this germaphobe?
No,
Himself
in
court documents.
It came out a lot when the Steele dossier came out, and there was the lurid allegations of what he had done.
I think anyone
who knew him was like
most people would be a germaphobe in that particular.
No, but it was just
he said it.
No, the point
he said it.
It was completely impossible for any of that to have been true if people know President Trump, because they know. I'm not going to go and describe what was in the Steele dossier.
All right, so let them decide to be gross.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, people here probably know, but the nickname for that, the furry boom mic is a dead cat. The furry stuff on it. So anyway, I can imagine President Trump being, recoiling just from that. But also, it's a serious security breach. You could just imagine what could be on the boom mic, right? Some ricin, which is, from castor oil. It's super deadly. You only need a few grains, like grains of salt amount. Or fentanyl or sarin or some, nerve toxin. But you only need a small amount. And the thing is with ricin, especially, is that it would take days, for the symptoms to even appear. So you can imagine probably it was an accident, right? Probably it was an accident. But even if it was, anyone, would-be assassin or an adversary looking at it going, that wasn't so tough. Or maybe it was a trial run, I don't believe it is. I believe it was an accident.
I think you're giving people ideas now, Cindy.
Well, but here's the other thing. It's like, and this was like a lot of the chatter I was looking at online, it's, what should the Secret Service have done at that point, right? Should they have, taken the reporter aside for questioning? Should they have taken the boom mic to test it?
They didn't?
Not that it was reported at all, and there are other reporters there. Like, it never came out that happened.
This is on top of the fact that a lot of these media, I mean, I don't know about that journalist in particular, but a lot of them have been kind of oddly supportive of domestic terrorism all of a sudden, and not to mention don't like Trump that much, it seems.
Are you thinking of firebombing Tesla?
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit of that. Well, I mean, just if you look at the other shoe being on the other foot, if like you had a reporter who you could look at their social media accounts and you found that they were very pro-Trump and anti-Biden, and they hit Biden with a boom mic, that would be a big story. I think that they'd call for the people to be kicked out in the heart. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
I think it is surprising that it wasn't a bigger story, like you said in the opening, like considering the number of legit assassination attempts,
including one just an alleged one last week, right?
Right. Well, there was they shot somebody near the White House, right?
What happened with that, by the way?
They think it was, I don't know, it looks like the narrative, they think he was, a suicide by cop kind of guy, one of these things. They don't think he was necessarily trying to breach to get at Trump, but
also because Trump wasn't there at the time.
Right.
I might have not known that. So, kind of anticlimactic, if you're gonna. So this whole boom mic situation kind of makes us once again think about assassination attempts against presidents, right? Obviously, and lo and behold, what's in the news right now? The JFK files, the files pertaining to an actual U.S. president having been assassinated. Chris, you looked into some of the new developments. Well, the new what would you call them? Discoveries in the files that have been released. Anything that stuck out to you?
It's like 80,000 pages, so I haven't finished combing through them all yet, but it's like 1,100 PDF files, and you can go on there's a website set up. Anyone at home can view these files now since they've now been released. But they've been hidden for about 60 years now. during which time, if there was any conspiracy, I'm pretty sure that that information would not have made it, or it wouldn't have been submitted in the first place. One of the key things that keeps popping up is there was a visit by Lee Harvey Oswald to Mexico 6 weeks before the assassination of John F. Kennedy. We know that he went to the Soviet Union. He was a defector. He went in '59, and then he came back to the U.S. in '62, I believe. He had a relationship. There was a question of whether or not he was a spy. Some of the conversations going back and forth were recorded in the files. There was some dialogue about whether or not he was working for the Russians, the Soviet Union. In the files, there's discussion that he was not. But then we know that the CIA was monitoring him during his trip to Mexico.
For 4 years, they were monitoring him.
Yes, they were monitoring him. And while he was there, he visited the USSR embassy, again, 6 weeks before the assassination, and he also visited the Cuban embassy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Cuba one's the big one.
Yeah.
And that the CIA lied to the Warren Commission that they knew nothing about Lee Harvey Oswald. They did not
Yes,
admit
they had to have known something because he was under surveillance.
but they didn't admit that.
But they didn't admit that.
Well, the important context of Cuba is the Bay of Pigs.
Correct.
Everything, of course.
Yeah.
And the CIA.
Yes. Yeah. 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 That's the blender there. But so if the question is, why did they wait so long to release this? No one really knows an answer to that.
Well, I mean, I feel like there must be still something coming because
Not all the documents have been released yet.
It's about a third more to come.
And again, the point that I was making earlier, if there was a conspiracy, I don't think it would be in these documents. That's not something that you record and then submit.
I think I saw like some jokes going around that all they did was basically showed us that documents are still being withheld, and so every conspiracy on it still
gets ramped
completely
up.
holds, basically. And so with that, we're still waiting for the drop. When the drop comes, we'll finally know the truth. and then after that, we'll know about the Epstein files and know about everything.
Any day now.
All right, so stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to tell you why the media is saying that a constitutional crisis is looming. This time, it's definitely going to, be a constitutional crisis. The boy that cried wolf, yeah. But to come back in 2 minutes, we'll tell you why. Yes, yeah, it has been invoked. What does that mean? And why is it that a certain judge disagreed?
Right. So obviously, to put the context in, right, we saw the flights being sent with this administration basically making like movie type trailers, but it's actual events of these criminals alleged, some very terrible things that are alleged against these people.
Pretty excellent production value.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen those videos, you should carry on.
Being sent to El Salvador. So mostly they're saying, these are Venezuelan gang members known as the Tren de Aragua group, just violent, terrible people. Being sent to El Salvador, you've seen the images of how they are in a prison there. But you do have this federal judge who's like, no, we're not going to do that. So if you look at the timeline, this judge called Mausberg made an order at 7 p.m. on Saturday night verbally, but it has to be written. So then 30 minutes later, he made a written docket. But at that point, so 7:30 p.m. on Saturday, 2 planes were already landing and refueling in international waters. So this court order telling the planes to come back wasn't applying. But here's where it gets more complicated, right? Because then it's like, okay, what is at the heart of this whole issue? So that's where this Alien Enemies Act comes in. Because if you look at the act, it says, whenever there shall be a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion shall be perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and the President of the United States shall make public proclamation of the event, then whoever they deem as an enemy of the state can be kicked out or held. And so here's where you go into 2 parts, right? So if you look at the first part, a declared war, that is the instances of when this act was triggered 3 times in history. The first one was the War of 1812, when British nationals living in America were deemed the aliens. World War I, President Woodrow Wilson used it. That was against the nationals from the Central Powers, so the German Empire, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria. and the third time was during World War II, of course, after the attack on Pearl Harbor. President Franklin Roosevelt used it against the Japanese, Germans, and Italians. And so, following that last instance,
Wait, hold on. The Germans and Italians too?
yes, of course,
Oh,
the
really?
Japanese were the main ones in the headlines, but it was used against like all three actors.
There were internment camps for Germans and Italians?
There are, yeah. If you look into like the National
Oh.
Archives and stuff, they were talking about that. So then, following that,
talking about that, or they had them?
they have examples of it, like numbers of it. So then, after that, the Supreme Court was asked about it, and the Supreme Court was like, we can't comment on what constitutes wartime because it's political, right? So that's what many people are citing right now. If you look at the very first line of the Supreme Court decision from 1948 about the use of the Alien Enemies Act, it says the Alien Enemy Act precludes judicial review of the removal or deportation order, as in they don't have a say. But this was about the wartime element. So right now, the question is, we're
that
not
was
in a
well
wartime.
after the fact too, right? You said it was 1948.
Yeah, so this was like looking at, was this act constitutional, basically.
Okay.
So, but the point is, the Supreme Court weighed in, because right now you have a lot of people citing that, being like, this is why President Trump has full steam ahead. He can do whatever he wants. So here is where it gets a bit more tricky, because if you look at the legal arguments against that, you're like, okay, well, right now we're not in a wartime act. So how do you prove the second element, the invasion or incursion? Obviously, you have President Trump. He's been calling this an invasion, all these different aspects. So he's fulfilled the publicly proclaimed part. But if you want to argue against it, there is a way where if you can prove that something is basically a mafia state. So you prove that the government of Venezuela is so intertwined and intermingled with this criminal group, Tren de Aragua, that they're basically one and the same, then you can be like, yes, I have the legal standing. So that's what supporters or advocates are saying. If President Trump wants to win this case, that's what they would have to argue in courts. But the argument that the federal judge is making is that you have to give them due process, because that doesn't take the the wartime angle. You're arguing the other elements. So instead of the political angle, due process tackles the legal part, as in everyone has to have due process before the law. So that's what they're arguing, that you have to prove that these people you're deporting are the criminals. So that's like where it's a bit messy. So you have like either side basically arguing their thing. So then in terms of the Trump team response so far, you have Attorney General Pam Bondi saying that the Trump administration would absolutely keep sending these planes forward. Doesn't matter what this one federal judge is saying.
And then hold on, Pam Bondi said that?
Yes.
Wow.
She's overriding the judge. She's overriding the judge from the Justice Department, and she's basically saying that a federal judge has no jurisdiction over national security decisions by the president.
And then you also have border czar Tom Homan weighing in, and he said, I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're not stopping. So that's the other take there.
Oh, that's wild, though. I mean, if the judge issued an injunction, all of that. Okay, so you know what? Normally when the media says there's a constitutional crisis, it's like the boy who cried wolf too many times. But this is an interesting one, actually.
Well, this is the case that Trump really has, though, and it's actually kind of funny because it's something Biden did, right? Something Biden did. When Biden was president, what did he do to Venezuela? He sanctioned a bunch of officials, including Maduro, the president of Venezuela, saying that they're tied to the Cartel del Sols, which is one of the big cartels there. And Trump said in this document, the Cartel del Sols works almost hand in glove with Tren de Aragua. And so he's using that as a basis of saying that the government in Venezuela, declared by the Biden administration, works with the cartel, and that the operations are working to, invade the United States.
Well, don't get me wrong. Like I personally, if you ask me, over a cup of coffee, I agree with that assessment and that view of things, and the fact that we probably should just kick them all out of the country back somewhere. It's just the fact that they're going to completely ignore this judicial injunction.
That is the constitutional crisis, and the real constitutional crisis, which actually, we'll see which way it goes, because if they rule against Trump, it's going to mess everything he does up. But the big question is, what is the separation of powers between the judicial branch and the executive branch? That's the real question, especially when it comes to national security, border security, and wartime orders, basically. If it was World War II and you invade, Germany, and some random judge, tells you can't do it, do you call the whole war off? Like, to what degree can a random judge block
Well,
this?
that's where it gets into it, because in Pam Bondi's, the Attorney General's response, she is pointing out that, these are foreign terrorists. The president has identified them and designated them as such, and we will continue to follow this Alien Enemies Act. That's what she was telling Jesse Waters. And then you do have,
And then we are going to appeal the judge. They,
Yes.
the declaration of going through
and
due
then, of course,
process.
you had Supreme Court Justice Roberts weighing in, talking about, quote, for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. And because he said that, many of Trump supporters are telling him to step aside. And then you already have Texas Congressman Brandon Gill filing articles of impeachment against the Judge Boasberg, the federal judge that filed to make these planes come back.
Okay, during this discussion, I had a realization that the biggest winner of this whole thing is the country of Guyana. Because Maduro, he was threatening to invade Guyana over that oil-rich sort of ocean deposit that's surrounding Guyana, and it's like, they share a border.
Northern tip of South America.
Yeah, exactly. And so he was going to. I mean, he announced he was going to invade in a few months, but now I imagine he wouldn't do that because there's American oil rigs set up right there on the coast of Guyana. So it's like if he invades, then the U.S. would probably be very inclined to step in, and then we have an actual war with Venezuela that's undeniable. And so I'm sure Guyana is breathing a sigh of relief because Venezuela is probably, the leadership there does not want to actually have a hot war because Trump probably does want a hot war just to justify his deportations. Okay, so that was just my little, realization. Okay, so after the break, come back, and we're going to discuss what the state of the Democrat Party is right now. After that sort of shellacking they received in the 2024 election, what is happening in the Democrat Party? Come back in 2 minutes, and Chris will break it down.